Hey everybody, we're going to jump into the next part of our introduction to Adobe Premiere Pro. First thing you're going to want to do is download this week's project files. I got a couple more things for you, some graphics created in Photoshop, as well as one more small video clip that you'll be able to use this week. So get those downloaded, and then you're going to want to open up last week's project and start with that. So let's start by just taking a quick look at what's in this week's project file. So I've got my project folder open here, and you might remember last week when we started, you downloaded the project folder, and it basically looked like this. We had an audio folder, video, and fonts. You then created an Adobe Premiere project, so you should have a file similar to this now in your project folder. You're also going to have the couple of folders that Adobe Premiere created for you automatically. So those are now in my project folder. This is the exports folder that I created when I exported my video from last week. And then once you download this week's file, you might as well go ahead and just drop that into your project folder, and then you'll have all of that together. So here's what we're looking at in this week's project file. I've got, let's see, 4 different Photoshop files. Most of these are, well, 2 of these I believe are single layer, and one of them, or a couple of them, have multiple layers. And then we've got this VHS overlay. I'm going to jump into Photoshop real quick, just so you can kind of see what it is that we're looking at here. So you're going to have a graphic that's got some kind of car graphics on it. These are like vintage advertising stuff. It's white and it has a transparent background, so that's a single layer file. I've also got that in black without transparency, so we got the white built in. I'm going to show you how these behave differently when we import them. I've gone ahead and taken the title that I built last week, and instead of doing the type in Premiere, I've done it in Photoshop instead. And the reason why I did that is because, I'm going to zoom in here, I used a custom brush for my eraser to just erase a little bit of this, to put a little bit of texture in there, create a little bit of grit on this. And you can't do that in Premiere. You can only do that in Photoshop. So I've done it in Photoshop. And here's the other thing that I've done is that I've got 2 layers here. So I've got half of it. I basically cut my word in half. And just so you know, this type was rasterized, so it's pixels now. It's no longer type in Photoshop. That's how I was able to delete it and modify it. And then I selected it, cut half of it apart, and so I got a top half and a bottom half. And I'm going to show you what I'm going to do with those in Premiere. Now, whenever I create a graphic in Photoshop, depending on what I'm doing with it, sometimes I'll make my graphic really big if I plan to have it bleed off of the edges in Premiere. So in other words, if it's going to be larger than the 1920 by 1080 canvas in Premiere, I'll go ahead and make that larger in Photoshop. What we're looking at here right now is a 1920 by 1080 canvas. And so it basically mimics the same exact canvas size that we're using in Premiere. Now, these other ones actually have a 19, well, actually they're larger. So this one is 2600 pixels wide. I made it larger than my Premiere canvas, just so I would have a little bit of flexibility if I want to scale this up or scale it down in Premiere. This gives me a little bit of extra image resolution to work with. All right, the 4th graphic that I have is this racing poster, and this one also has 2 layers. So you can see this black and white layer on top, and I got a color layer below. So I'm going to bring both of those into my project as well. And let's see, this one has a 1920 width, so the width of this will be the same as my Premiere project, but the height is going to be much, much taller. So I'm going to show you how to scale some of these things down in Premiere. All right, so I'm going to move over, and I'm basically just going to open up my project from last week. All right, the first thing to do once you're in your project is make a copy of last week's sequence. The videos that you made are great. There's no reason to work over the top of those and put what you've created at risk of losing it. So we're going to go ahead and just create a new sequence. So this is the sequence that I worked on last week. So I'll just kind of zoom out just a little bit so you can see it. Now I'm working with my files in separate folders. Okay, so you can do that. I'm in my project folder, or as I've mentioned in last week's demo as well as in class, you can also just have all your files just sitting all together in this folder. So right now I don't have my audio or my video files open, so I'm going to double click video so that it opens, because that is where my sequence is saved. If you ever need to change the view so that you can see things alphabetically and sort them, you can click this little icon down here that gives you the list view. So if you've named everything well, this can be helpful because you can very quickly find things. So here's my sequence. So let's make a copy of that. I'm going to right click or control click on it, and I'm going to choose duplicate. So it makes a copy. It puts the word copy at the end of it. So I'm just going to go ahead and edit that so that this is sequence 2. I'm going to double click on it to open it up. And you didn't really see much change here, but you might have noticed I got a new tab up here at the top. So I am now in sequence 2. If I click over sequence 1, they basically look exactly the same, right? Because they are a duplicate. So this will be great. We can work on this, and we've always got this other sequence if we need to go back to it. So that can be really helpful. All right, a couple of things before we import our new files. There's a couple of things that I want to show you. So when I edit, I like to really take advantage of the tracks. Again, they kind of function as layers, right? A track that's on top of another track. This is basically sitting on top of whatever's below it. So I really like that way of working. If you ever need to add additional tracks to either your audio or your video, you can just right click on one of these and choose add track, and it adds another track above that track that you just right clicked on. So now I can drop more stuff in here. So that's a great way. Like we just laid down this long Corvair track last week, right? And then we started dropping smaller stuff on top of it. But just so you know, if I were to grab one of these clips, like if I were to open up this drag racing clip here and get myself an in point, and a couple of seconds later get myself an out point, and I want to drag this down here, right? I showed you how to drag that onto a layer above all of the other stuff, and then it essentially becomes the dominant clip, right? But just so you know, if you know like, hey, I want this to go right here in this spot on my Corvair timeline, you can actually drag stuff right on top of other things and let it go. Now what it did was it basically split my Corvair track. So there, I'm Corvair, and then it's drag racing, right? But this is all happening on video track number 1. Now as I come here, I'm getting the Los Angeles track because that's up above, but if I turn that track off, I'm back to Corvair. So watch as it goes from Corvair to the drag racing clip that I dropped in to Corvair again. So it has split that clip. So that is another way to add to the timeline. I'm just going to undo my way out of there. Now, similar to that, I can grab a film clip and bring it over here. Now you see the little icon, it's got kind of a blue downward facing arrow on it. That means it's going to basically split whatever clip I'm dropping it on, and it doesn't make space for it. It's like overriding whatever I'm putting it on top of. But if I hold the command key, you can see I get all these little white arrows, and the little blue arrow on my icon down there has changed. If I do that, then what it's actually doing is everything that's down line from where I just dropped this little piece in, it pushed it. So see this and watch the end of my video here. I'm going to redo that just so you can see how everything just moves. So I'm going to undo and I'm going to redo. And so it's pushing everything down further. So that's just another way of adding clips to your timeline that I thought would be important. All right, the other thing I'm going to show you before we import our files, last week I showed you how you can fade audio out, and you can adjust the audio levels simply by making your audio tracks a little bit larger so you can kind of see what's going on in here. I kind of talked about some of these tools, including the pen tool and being able to add points to a line so that we can create this fade. So this white line here is basically my audio level, and it fades out at the end. I wanted you to know that you can also do that with video. So for example, we got this Los Angeles track. This is it showing up right here, right? And it just does a quick clip. When it ends, it just goes right to the clip that's below it. And we talked about transitions, right? I could right click on the end here, put apply default transition, and then I get a little bit of a crossfade, right? You see that cross dissolve happening? I'm gonna undo that. But the other thing that I can do is I can expand my video track similar to the way I did my audio track, and I've got a white line showing up here now. And if I hold the command key, so I can basically do the same thing that I did to the audio. I can like grab my pen tool and I can put a little point on that, and I can put another point and drag it down. But while I have my selection tool, I can also just hold the command key and click. You see how my arrow turned white? It has a little plus on it there. So if I click now, it's kind of the same thing. It's basically like I'm momentarily switching over to my pen tool. It's a different version. And so now I can drag this line down, make this even a little bit bigger, and I can drag this over. And so it's the same thing. You see how it's got a long fade? So I'm basically doing that cross dissolve, but I'm fully controlling it with keyframes, basically, with key points that I've dropped on that line. So I want you to know that that is a possibility as well. Okay, so the reason why I'm showing you this is because I just want to reinforce this idea of keyframes, because they're going to be very important as we start making use of the effect controls. We're going to be talking about keyframes a lot coming up here. All right, let's go ahead and get this week's stuff in. So I'm going to click back over here to the project because, again, I'm working in these separate bins just to help stay organized. And I'm going to go to my project folder. And I'm just going to grab this whole part 2 and drag it into my project and let it go. Now, it's going to ask a couple of questions here. Basically, I've got some layered Photoshop files in here. Okay. Now, Photoshop files are the only files that we can bring in where if the Photoshop file has layers, it's going to ask us what we want to do with those layers. Okay, and we have some options here. Now, it's going to ask me for each of my files. So right now, this is my white transparent graphic. It only has one layer, so it really doesn't matter what I say. I'm just going to go ahead and say merge all layers. That'll be totally fine. So I'll say OK. Now, this one's got 2 layers. And if I merge these together, I'm basically just going to have whatever the top layer is. It's just going to be like a flat Photoshop file. So for this one, I'm actually going to ask it to bring in individual layers. Okay. So I'll say OK. And then for this one, my speed graphic, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm not going to tell it to merge. I want it to bring in individual layers. So I'm going to say OK on that. And then it imported them all. So now I've got basically a third bin dropped in here. So I'm going to double click on that. And here's all my files. Okay. Now it looks a little bit different, right? Because I've got this is my black graphic. This is my white graphic. This is that VHS overlay. Those just came in on their own. But these other 2 things came in as folders. And the reason why is because these are my 2 layered Photoshop files. So if I double click on that, boom, both of the layers of my Photoshop file came in essentially as individual files. Okay, this is going to be super helpful. So let's see here. I'm going to go back to that bin because I also want to get my speed graphic open. Okay, so I got a lot of bins open right now. I can't see them all at once, right? So if you can't see everything, if you're confused about what's going on here, this little right arrow off to the side will help you find things a little bit easier. Okay, so this bin for the speed graphic, that's the 2 layers of that title that I created. This is that poster. And then if we just go to bin part 2, I can access these other files. All right. I'm going to shrink this layer back down just a little bit, just to kind of make space in my view here. All right. Now, last week, I dropped in a title here, and we just did that using the text tool. Okay. Now, I'm using Workspace editing. Okay. And I also have my Essential Graphics and my Lumetri color panels open. If you don't have those, for example, if I reset my workspace here real quick, let's just go reset to saved layout. So your layout may look like this. If you need those other panels, it's just going to be Window, open up the Essential Graphics, and Window, open up your Lumetri color, because we are going to use this panel in a minute. All right. So if I click on my type here, and I go to Essential Graphics and I go to Edit, right, I can edit my type layer for this. I can click on it and it basically selects this layer, and I've got all of these controls. Now, this Essential Graphics, you can see I've got one layer here. We can actually add additional layers and start to build a complete graphic with multiple layers and incorporate different bits of type, shapes, etc. I'm not going to go into that today, but know that that's there, and we will be covering this panel much more in depth in the coming weeks. But what I want to do this time is show you how you can start to create type and motion graphics outside of Adobe Premiere and bring that in. So I'm in my sequence 2 here. I'm going to go ahead and just delete the type that I did yesterday. Make sure that you've got at least 2 open video layers where you want your title to go. And I'm going to work my way basically into this part 2 bin and into my speed graphic folder. And I'm going to put both of these on my timeline. So I'm going to grab the bottom one first. I'm going to put it right about there. I'm going to grab the top one, and I'm going to put it exactly in alignment. So there's my 2 things, okay? So if I go from the beginning and play, it does kind of the same thing as last week, okay? But it's made up from graphics that I brought in from Photoshop. So now I'm going to show you how to create some basic motion and apply some motion things to this. So let's start with the top one here. And I'm going to click it to activate it. And then up here in my source window, I'm going to click on Effect Controls. All right. Now, you watched a tutorial earlier this week on how a lot of this works. And so right now, we're going to focus on motion. And what I want to do is for this sequence, this is going to be your left-right motion, and this is going to be your top-bottom motion. So I'm just going to click on this left number, which is currently at 960, and I'm going to kind of slide my mouse to the left. So I'm basically looking to get a smaller number here. And I want to keep moving that until it is off screen. And then I'm going to click my little stopwatch. And I'm going to put a keyframe. Then I'm going to click on that keyframe, and I'm going to move it all the way to the start of this clip. So what we're seeing up here in pink, this is basically the duration from start to finish of the clip. So this keyframe, basically when this clip starts playing, and I can move my timeline back to the start there, when it starts playing, that top little bit of graphic is all the way to the left. Now when I get to about here, I actually want that graphic to be right in the middle. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure that this is clicked so that I'm seeing what's up here. And right now it's still set to minus 728. Well, let's put that right back in the middle. So I'm going to hit my little reset parameter, and it puts it back where it originally started, and it also created a keyframe. Okay, so this first keyframe, it's off screen. This middle keyframe, it's in the middle where I want it, and it stays there for the duration of the clip. The only thing that would change it is if I were to add another keyframe for a different position over here. All right, now the bottom one, let's do kind of the opposite. So I'm going to click the bottom one so that it is now what is showing up in my effect controls. I'm going to take this left-right number, which is at 960. We want a higher number now because I'm going to send the bottom off the right side. So I'm just clicking and dragging to get that number to slide. And you can see it's about 2600 is what that number needs to be to push this all the way across. I'm going to specify a key point. So I'm going to click my little stopwatch and it makes a key point. Now, same thing, we want it to be off screen basically at the beginning. So I'm just going to go ahead and slide that key point all the way over. I'm going to click my top video because I kind of want to see where its spot is in the timeline to where it lands in the middle. And then I'm going to click this bottom one so that it's what is showing up in the effects panel. And I'm going to create a new keyframe here with it reset in the beginning. So I'm going to use this little reset option for my position. Booyah. All right. So there it is back in the middle. All right. And so if I go all the way back to the beginning here and we hit play, you can see those kind of slide in, right? Now, I think this title's up a little bit too long. I actually want it to, well, let's see. I think I want it to disappear about there. So I'm going to grab both of these clips. Let me zoom in just a little bit here so you can kind of see. And with both of these selected at the same time, I'm going to kind of trim them up just a little bit. And I'm going to shorten up the duration at which these things slide in. So I'm basically going to move that keyframe, the keyframe that specifies it should be in the middle, a little bit closer over for that one. And I'll select this other one. And I'll do the same thing. I'm going to bring its keyframe there. So now if I back up a little bit and hit play on my sequence, that's a little bit faster. Still not quite fast enough. I'm going to trim it up just a little bit more. And do the same thing on the bottom one. I'm just matching those two keyframes up. And let's see how that looks. All right, that feels a lot better. And now let's go ahead and just fade these out at the end. So I'm going to go ahead and do it kind of the quick way and just put default transitions on here. So I'm clicking this, right clicking, apply default transitions, and then that'll create a little fade out there at the end. All right, so that's feeling pretty good. All right, the next thing that I want to add is one of those Photoshop graphics that we brought in. So let's just find another spot on the timeline that we could bring some of that in. I think this is probably a good space to drop one of those. So I'll find my way back into my bin part 2. And let's grab this white one here. So I'm just going to bring it into kind of that empty spot there. And it doesn't matter which of our video tracks we drop this on. I just want to make sure it's above my Corvair footage. And so any empty spot I have, I can put it. It's kind of totally up to you. I don't want it quite this long, so I'm going to just trim it up just a little bit. And let's put a little bit of motion on this so you can kind of see it just shows up, right? Now this is white with transparency, so we can see through it. Pretty cool. What if I were to grab this black one that doesn't have transparency and drop it in? It covers everything below it, right? So that's why I include both of these, because I want to kind of show you that difference. Now, last week I started to introduce you to blend mode. So if I click on this one that's black with a white background, it activates it over here in the effect controls. And we could think about, well, I could adjust its opacity and then we can start to see stuff, right? So that's one thing we could do. You could also explore blend modes. Like for example, if we multiply, everything that's white is going to go transparent. So that's kind of cool, right? But you could also play around with some of your other things like screen or overlay or lighten and see what kinds of effects you can get from that. But I'm going to delete that because I really want to use this white one instead. So let's go ahead and just bring that in here. I'm going to shorten it up just a little bit. And let's apply some motion to this. Okay. I actually am going to reduce the opacity just a tad bit on it, not too much, just a little bit. And then up here, I'm going to change the top to bottom number under position. So this is in the motion category. So let's go ahead and just send this kind of all the way down and off screen. And I'm going to click my stopwatch and I'm going to set a keyframe. And this is where I want to start. So let's go ahead and just slide that over to the beginning of it. Okay. Now, by the end of the clip, down, around here, I actually want that to be all the way up. So I'm going to click and drag a few times, and let's see what kind of number we need to get this all the way past. And of course, you can also just click and plug a number in there if you want, or while it's active, I can also come over here and double click on it and move it, and it'll create a keyframe for me and change the number over here. So that's another possibility as well, but let's just go ahead and get it all the way off. Okay, there we go. And I want this to happen at the very end of this little snippet. So let's go ahead and just slide that all the way to the end. Let's see what that looks like. Okay, now we're getting somewhere. All right, the next thing I want you to do is to grab this VHS overlay and let's put it over the top of this boring Los Angeles scene that we've got to add a little bit of effect. All right, that is much too long, so let's double click it and bring it up in here and actually specify an endpoint and an out point. And let's drag that in. And I'm just going to kind of on the spot get it dialed in so that it's over this Los Angeles thing the whole entire time. And I can't see anything. What? Why can't I see below it? It's because this video actually has a black background. So I'm going to click on that, click on Effect Controls, and let's change its blend mode. I think what we probably want is, let's see, lighten. Yeah, lighten is what does it. You can do multiply, right? And we start to see a little bit of our footage through the white stuff. But lighten is what we want if we want all that black to basically come transparent. Now, this little video clip, as I kind of scan through it, you can see these little lines, this little kind of glitch stuff showing up. So that's part of this overlay. So that's just an example of how textures could work. Now you can kind of see my Los Angeles clip. It starts to dissolve at the end, right, into that Corvair. So you would want to match up that dissolve if you want them to fade together. But the other thing that we could do is, you know what, maybe that Los Angeles clip is just too frickin' long. So let me find my video bin, go to my project, find my little video clips from last week. And maybe I'll take this grunge transition. I don't want the audio with it though. It's going to mess up my audio track. So I'm going to double click on it to open it up here. I'm going to grab the film. I'm going to put it right at the end of that VHS overlay. So that's what that looks like. And let's go ahead and click on it to activate it. Click Effect Controls. And let's change its blend mode to maybe multiply. Let's see, where does that start to dissolve? Right about there. So I'm actually going to shorten it up so that little glitch happens right as the dissolve happens. So let's see what that looks like. There's our graphic. We got that VHS stuff. A little glitch, transition where the fade and the dissolve. All right, we're getting there. Okay, so that introduces you basically to some of the things in the effects controls panel, right? And we did look at blend modes a little bit last week. So really what we're starting to kind of take a look at is in the motion category, thinking about position. You can also think about scale. So for example, if I have, let's see if I come into part 2, if I think about this racing poster here, and maybe we'll want to get that added in somewhere. So let's just say I grab this. Okay, so there it is, just kind of dropped in, can't see anything below it. Of course, I can adjust opacity if I have it selected, right? So we can kind of see stuff behind it a little bit. We could experiment with some of these other modes as well. Okay, so there's some weird stuff starting to happen, right? So click on that. Let me just reset this back to normal for a second. And let me just show you real quick how some of these other things work, such as scale, for example. I could set this to be really big, set a key point, go a little bit further down the line. Have the scale go all the way to 0. Slide these out for the duration of the clip. So it starts really big, zooms into nothing, right? And then the other thing that we can do is also, if I select that racing poster, we can apply motion at the same time. So let's do a little bit from the right, a little bit from the bottom. Let's put a keyframe there. Come down here, we'll hit the reset button to get another keyframe with it right in the middle. We'll slide that over, slide that over. So now as I scale it, you can see it's getting smaller, but it's also sliding from the left to the right. You can also do keyframes with opacity. So same kind of thing. If I wanted to, for example, have this opacity be 0, I can make a keyframe for that. Go a little bit further down the line and set that opacity to be 100. So now as we scale down, right, that opacity is changing as well. All right, so let's go all the way down to our sequence. We'll hit home. I'm gonna hit the play button. All right. So what I want you to do this week is to basically play around with the graphics that I've provided you. You can also create some of your own graphics in Photoshop and bring those in. But I want you to create your own title sequence. So outside of Premiere, create type using a different application, and then bring that in as essentially a Photoshop file with transparency in it, and apply motion effects to it. Think about position, think about scale, you can even think about rotation and play with that, but basically start to create a bit of a title sequence with some motion effects on it. Then somewhere else in your timeline, think about improving the clip arrangement. Maybe you go back to some of those clips from last week and rethink your edit a little bit, and then get some other graphic elements applied in there, such as like this VHS overlay or this graphic, and do some of those things this week and experiment with that a little bit. All right, before we call it all said and done, the last thing I want to show you is just a little introduction to adjusting color. So these effects that are in here right now, these are the basic effects that are going to be on every single clip. If I come down here into my project window, click on this arrow, I can actually work my way to this effects bin. And there is a whole world of stuff in here, particularly in video effects, that you can start to drop in. Even just thinking about like color correction, for example. If I come in here, there's a whole bunch of effects. So I could, for example, I don't know, let's see, if I wanted this drag racing clip here to be black and white, I could go into my color effects. I have it clicked, so my effect controls is open up here. I could grab my Lumetri color as an effect just for this clip, drop it here, and I could go into basic correction, find saturation, drag that all the way down to 0, and you can see my clip is now black and white across the whole thing. I also, same thing, now that I've got that in here, so I'll select it again. All of these things, anytime you see one of these stopwatches, I can basically set a keyframe. So I can have it be 0 at one point, saturation, and then we go a little bit further down and I can set it back to 100% saturation. And so basically that clip is going to be black and white, and then it fades into color, right? So we have so much control. You can search within this effects tab for things like blur effects and stuff like that. So if you want to apply a blur to something, this is how you would do it, and you can drop it into your clip and apply keyframes to it to set it over a specific time if you want. All right, that last thing that I told you I was going to show you is what if you wanted to apply color across your entire 30 seconds, but you didn't want to like apply it to one clip, copy that effect, paste it into another clip. You just want to be able to have it go all the way across. Well, the easiest way to do that is going to be with an adjustment layer. So I'm going to actually go to my topmost video track. I'm going to say add track so that I get one more track above everything else that's on here. Let me zoom out a little bit so you can kind of see the whole shebang a little bit. All right. And so I've got my new video clip up here at the top. Let's make a little bit more space for all of that. So I'm going to click in my bin. So let's go to my video bin. I'm going to put it in here. So with a bin, one of your bins active, we're going to go File, New, Adjustment Layer. We want it to be the same dimensions and same settings as our project. So that's going to be what shows up here. Say OK. And there's that adjustment layer. You can double click on it and give it another name if you want. But this is kind of like a video file, but there's nothing in it. But we can take it and we can drag it onto our timeline. And if I come back here to the beginning, it hasn't done anything to my video timeline. And I can click on it and I can drag it all the way out. So now it's a full 30-second clip. And again, if I go down my timeline, it hasn't made any changes. But because this is essentially kind of like an empty video clip, I can click on it and have it activate in the effect controls over here. So if I want, I can go to that effects bin. And I could look for video effects. I could go into color correction, and I could take this Lumetri color and drop it in. And I could go into, let's see, I could come up here and do something crazy, like drag all of my curves or something. And now you can see that that effect goes across my entire video. So maybe that's a little too crazy. Maybe that's not what I want. But I'm like, hey, I just want basic black and white. So let's go into basic correction. Let's go to our saturation. Let's turn it all the way down to 0. Now you can see my entire clip is in black and white. And of course I can turn it on and off as well. So that could be really useful if you're trying to apply color across all of your video clips across your entire timeline. you might want to play around with an adjustment layer as well. Okay, so play around a little bit this week. Definitely, I want you to import some new graphics. You can use the ones that I provided you. You can create some of your own if you feel up for doing that. But I want you to import some graphics with transparency. If they don't have transparency, then I want you to play around with the blending modes and opacity so that we can see clips that are underneath it. Apply some motion, apply some scale. If you feel brave and up to it, you can bring in some of those other effects and play around with those, but definitely incorporate those keyframes so that your effects happen over time. And then export it, upload it to YouTube, get that embed code, drop that into Canvas, and that'll be your project for this week. All right, I'll see you all in the classroom. Thank you for your time. Email me if you have any questions, and I'll see you soon.